Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to a little bit of a report on my findings here on the Japanese version of Tactics Ogre PSP in terms of what's different, at least in terms of the sort of additional playthrough that I gave it recently. Like as far as any stuff that I can go and immediately identify while not understanding a dang hint of the language that I'm looking at in front of me, though it does amuse me to no end how many of the leaders have little smiley faces in their name. I'm sure that's an actual character that somebody can identify. To me, it just looks like they're smiling a bunch. Anyways, with that being said, the Japanese version of Tactics Ogre, what happened there? Well, they had a lot of different balance stuff overseas, and additionally, supposedly, it didn't come with all the DLCs. But here's the confusing part. Because I went into this whole thing, specifically not going for any of the DLC unlocking characters, because it was my understanding that, well, it didn't come with any of the DLC as per all of the sources that I'd heard of that were mentioning anything about this game up to this point. Which, granted, aren't many, but it's it's still something that that came up every now and then. Now that being said, apparently a good bit of that is actually incorrect, as clearly the thing for episode 1 is here, though it is worth mentioning. Unlike the US version, this shows up properly. So, like, in the version that we got, when it comes to the coda chapters, the little kind of thingy that tells you how to unlock the chapter pops up immediately after unlocking the chapter. It's one of those weird little quirks in that one. Now, I didn't double check if this was specifically just an episode 1 quirk and maybe they work the same, but it seems like it unlocks early in this one because I can't actually access that coda chapter due to having played through the neutral route. So either way, that'll be a follow-up episode all of its own, but I wanted to talk about the findings that I had along the way here in terms of just the interesting little changes throughout all of it, because there were quite a few. So for one thing, I want to mention this actually uses a bit of a different UI layout as well as a different text, which obviously. But as far as I'm concerned, I actually to some degree, I kind of prefer the spacing on the original letters, at least for this section of the screen right here. Just tends to stick out a little bit more. But obviously for all the rest of it, it had to be spaced around a decent bit differently due to all of the extra, symbols and stuff on screen, so there's that. Additionally, one of the things that I just made a video on recently was the fact that we actually had ninjas with longbows, which is interesting because I expected to actually find more weapon discrepancies among all the classes. This might be the only one, because when I went through all of the different classes and such, I went through trying to find any kind of discrepancies as far as any weapons and such like that. This was the only thing that came up whatsoever, that you just had ninjas that are able to use longbows in this one. It felt kind of like they were trying to be a bit of a counterpart to rogues in that particular way, kind of like how you had like a few different opposites, like knights, terror knights, all of that kind of thing. It felt like rogues and ninjas were meant to be opposites of each other, with the rogues getting the heavy crossbows, ninjas getting the longbows. And then they probably realized how friggin' crazy overpowered that is, and they just took away their ability to access longbows when it came to the US release. But yeah, this is kind of interesting because it actually does explain a couple of things. For one thing, as I said in that first video, it does explain why the archer's eagle eye is so expensive, because with an archer paired up with some ninjas, that is essentially overcoming the one weakness the ninja has compared to the archer, which is their lack of guaranteed shooting abilities, which then allows them to use kind of the longbow specialty of, breaking arms, legs, charming, all of that kind of thing. Just all of the ridiculously overpowered effects that longbows have in this game. But then you're also combining it with their way longer movement. They have 2 extra movement tiles compared with the archer. They've got an extra tile of vertical movement. They've got their steel stance for basically becoming invincible in this version. So either way, they are beyond fucked powerful. So just putting Eagle Eye on there is like, yeah, this dude has like guaranteed mind control plus guaranteed silence, or has like guaranteed poison plus guaranteed shackle. Like, it's just, oh man, it's so busted. But yeah, either way, it's a fun little change, though I will mention, due to balance differences between the different versions, we do actually see, okay, let's actually talk stats real quick, because this is actually kind of a weird one. So as far as the stats go, growths are insanely quick in this one, seemingly because it was balanced for, a single story playthrough, and then if you want to do other stuff, you do other stuff. But this actually has a few little interesting things, namely that the early game is way more open in terms of its equipment. Like, the early game feels very Tactics Ogre Reborn in that way, where basically any crafted weapon you make is still going to hold up just fine for quite a decently long time. And surprisingly, this actually gives a little bit of extra gravitas to the Lodicians when they show up, because they kind of stand out as dramatically more powerful than anybody else in this version. Like, even once you finish fighting off Branton and whatever else, like even the Bakram are barely like a blip on the radar next to when you start fighting Lodicians proper. To the point that like that's the one point in the game that all of the sort of like freedom of crafted equipment from the early game just completely disappears, and now it's time to get frickin' optimal with this stuff. Like, it's actually kind of interesting that when it came to the final boss, even the somewhat optimized unit that I have over here, who triple trained as a rogue, archer, and ninja, was the highest rank on the team with her longbow, was basically carrying the team throughout the entire game, did one against the final boss. So as far as Hanging Gardens, I don't want to say it's dramatically more difficult, because for the most part it is still the same old Hanging Gardens, but Dorgi, by comparison, presumably due to some kind of scaling shenanigans or whatever else, notably harder to kill. Although, that being said, again, very Reborn in that particular way. Like, I mentioned that there were a lot of vibes in Reborn that felt similar to the Japanese version, but I think one of the most telling ones for me personally is one that we can actually show off right here. Actually, no, we can just go ahead and show up right here. You know how the PSP shot grenades didn't work? Yeah, the Japanese shot grenades work just fine, and they absolutely kick ass. Again, these are basically Reborn grenades, so it's just wild to me that they work here. Though I did test it, they don't seem to interact with the throwing skill, they don't seem to interact with their elemental skills, so that aspect of them is still busted. But yeah, no, they do actually function as a proper, reasonable weapon here. I remember at some point somebody explained to me, like, statistically why they did that, so either way, for whatever dang reason, they do just fine in the statistics department, and we'll just go ahead and leave that there. So we'll go ahead and pop a few of these characters out here so that we can show off some of this, and there we go. Which actually, you know what, we'll back out of this map, because I can show this while showing off another interesting change in this version, in that deploy limits are actually different in a few places. Now, I didn't go through every single map to determine each particular one, but Tynemouth is supposed to have a 7 deploy limit. It's got 6. Interestingly enough, then when we got Reborn, the 7 limit was changed to the entrance of Ferrampa, which is 6 in all prior versions. So it's just kind of interesting that 7 seems to be the magical training number that they want to go for, but they can't seem to decide on where it goes. So there's that. Anyway, so like, let's say we go over to the shot grenades over here, and lo and behold, they actually kill shit. It's amazing. Well, actually, no. They deliberately still are basically a flashbang, so they can't actually kill something, but they do solid damage. Like, they are a legitimately good weapon. So yeah, as far as replacing the entire thrown category with these, honestly, I don't even know why you'd use thrown weapons when it came to this version. Also, wait, I forgot, I don't have Field Alk on Donalto. Whoopsie. Anyways, they're not like the ultimate end-all be-all, but I will say they were notably more powerful than any other weapon versus the final boss. So they're just as much of a crutch there as they were in Reborn, so you got that. Alright. Now, next on the pile here, okay, so actually one more thing I just want to mention as far as the Archer Ninjas are concerned, that when it comes to the kind of translation of Vice getting longbows later, it isn't as much out of left field, because P is basically a super ninja, so him having access to longbows does make a little bit of sense, but it seems like they wanted to limit it to just him in the PSP version, which does make a decent bit of sense. Now, that being said, actually one more thing that is worth mentioning is that crafting rates are dramatically lower in this version, so I brought this up a little bit in previous videos. But even as we're getting towards the kind of tail end of the game here, even with a couple of characters that are decently well optimized, like, keeping up with longbows, like, it's still like 30% odds to actually do this. These odds improved by, looks like 1%, or actually no, 4%, going through the Hanging Gardens. So, average stat rates do still make this go up. So if you are like playing super min-maxy with this, this will give you crafted equipment early. What's interesting is that in a sort of mental way, the way that these rates are so much lower in this version, it kind of makes it so that when you have all this extra equipment, you have extra money laying around, it kind of makes it to the point that this is almost like a slot machine for crafted equipment. Like, in a Headspace sort of way, like in the US release, it's close enough that you usually will just kind of go and, reload for it. It feels almost like you're intended to fail crafting something 3 or 4 times in this one. And to that end, that's exactly how I played it in, both versions, just basically just like roll for your crafted equipment and whatever else. And while it was a colossal pain in the ass, like I lost 6 composite bows before I finally said fuck it, I'm just sticking with 1. but either way, it does. I don't know. Mentally speaking, it somehow was less stressful with the lower crafting odds, as dumb as that sounds. Like, it just sort of felt like you're not intended to get this, and you get a pretty big jump from getting them. Though I will say, despite having a bigger kind of a jump in terms of your options when you get them, and typically getting better longevity due to stats being higher in this version, I will say that, yeah, if I were to pick one, obviously it would go with Reborn or One Vision on that, but if I had to pick between the two, definitely the Western release, because in that one, at least you get the feeling of being overpowered for a little while. In this one, it's like you got some extra options on your attack, I guess, and then you end up losing those materials like 10 times in a row, and that's just kind of annoying. Which, actually, one more thing I kind of skimmed over but didn't exactly cover. So, growth rates. So, as you can see, the difference between a character having multiple class growths as well as one that just was raised once is pretty significant, because stat growths across the board for base stats are actually anywhere from like 2 to 10 times higher in this version. And so this means that if you, let's say, swap a character between multiple different classes, you will get dramatically higher stats. So, like, the ninja across the board has like 15 higher stats than the warrior over here, who kind of got left behind. Actually, in this version, I will mention that there's something weird about the weapon training. Like, the weapon training was always slow in PSP, but, like, this is abhorrently slow. Like, to the point that even with this unit sticking around up until Chapter 4, still only rank 2 on her axes. Even when it came to a ninja that I was using basically full time, like to skip the entirety of Hanging Gardens, I literally just turned on an infinite action sheet and just repeatedly had her shoot everything, and she's still, despite spending like 2 hours doing nothing but shooting things, is only at rank 5, which would be like max in the original. For the sake of context, before doing that, even the 2 characters, which was, the 2 ninjas here, that ended up having the most experience across the team, they still were only at rank 2 on their weapons. When it came to Canopus here, he started off at rank 2. He only ended up gaining 1 rank over the course of the entire game. He also was carrying for several chapters. He never did get his dagger rank up to the point of getting a finisher. When it came to the Siren over here, who originally was a enchantress, she's been using Meditate all game. It's only 30% towards rank 2. Like, I don't know what's going on. I feel like, I don't know if experience rates are lower. I don't know if it's not checking everything, because I noticed when an attack is blocked, I didn't see any experience being added to the counter. So maybe that's the difference. Maybe it was just low rolling so hard that it didn't even increment anything. I don't know. But it feels like skill rates are just ungodly punishing in this one. So basically, like the Japanese version, you get all the stats but none of the skills, and that feels pretty shitty when the AI is showing up with it. Additionally, I couldn't confirm this, but I believe the actual odds of parry doing its thing might be higher. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but I do know that, for example, when I was trying to test it, and I found somebody that had, let's say, rank 2 deflect, and then I was going and firing at them over and over and over, and that rank 2 deflect, basically on multiple different occasions, had managed to, let's say, like, I believe there were like something like 8 available shot tiles in that particular test, and it managed to deflect 6 out of those 8, and then it did so again, and then it did so again. it felt like the odds were higher, so I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe they are, maybe it was just bad luck. I honestly don't know. Okay. Actually, one more interesting thing is one that you already somewhat saw there, is in the UI. So they actually redesigned an element of the UI for the later Western release. Because when it comes to your item list, the items that you cannot use are grayed out. It turns out in the Japanese release, it's actually a little bit cleaner, in that when you, let's say, can use all of your items, they'll just be right here, available for use. And if you go to, let's say, somebody that can't use those items, they're just simply not on the list. So, kind of interesting that that is a thing. It's possible that it is a setting somewhere, but it was available by default here. But either way, I just found that kind of interesting. Personally, I actually prefer the look of that, if I were to pick one. Okay. Now, next, buffs. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a couple of save files here to show you what I'm talking about. But the AI absolutely loves using buffs. Now, they do seem to prefer using buffs on the right targets, but they do also seem to have a situation where they kind of maybe don't know the difference sometimes, and/or will just kind of do whatever if left to their own devices. So let's see if I can't read any of this. I'm going to assume this is the right one, maybe. Are you the right one, maybe? No, this was the longbow file. Dang it. All right, well, just give me a second while I figure out which one of these save files it is. But the point is, the AI will typically prefer using, let's say, kind of instill buffs on units that have those elements, but will still kind of default to themselves and then go and instill somebody else if and when they happen to... Please tell me I didn't just load the same one. Yeah, no, this is the right one. So they will basically spam buffs like crazy, in the case that they have nothing better to do. And this does include funny situations where they love to prioritize leaders, and they love to prioritize the units around leaders. Now, I don't know how much of this AI is still there in later versions, but I did find it particularly interesting, because in cases like Gildora, like, dude, they are hyping her up like crazy to go hit somebody with her walking stick. So, that mess is just funny. Okay, actually, speaking of stat differences, this is something that Rake's described as just kind of magic in general having a sort of advantage going into attacks in either this version or just PSP version in general. But your actual spells on things like Valkyries do actually have a lot more staying power in this version. So basically they only start properly bouncing off of armor and stuff like that once you get to around when you're fighting the Lodicians and stuff. So again, giving that more of that kind of air of gravitas to those units. But yeah, spells in general tend to last a good bit longer. Let's see. Interestingly enough, also, due to the way that everything's a bit more, I guess you could say, smoothed out as far as stats go, the Baldur set is not actually as valuable in this one. So in multiple cases, like let's say if you're playing the PSP version, there's going to be kind of niche use cases for specific armors as a bit of a stat crutch. And again, it's just due to stats being higher in this version in general. But things like let's say the Baldur set, in the Western release, you would see a pretty notable bump in your offensive output if you're like, okay, I have a Terror Knight, I decided to give them, let's say, an Iron Fan, a Baldur Shield, a Baldur Plate Legs, Baldur Armor, and now suddenly they're noticeably, a lot more punchy with their attacks and stuff. They are giving things up, sure, but they're noticeably a lot more punchy. And again, a bit more like Reborn in this particular way, just due to higher stats across the board, that those little niche use cases are kind of wiped out. So it's not, again, both ways have their benefits. It just sort of felt a little weird to be like, hey, I'm going to put all this Baldur stuff on my Valkyrie, and it made no difference. So there's that too. Okay. Also, okay, another weird one. Let's see if I can find it here, because he should still be carrying it. Weird little sprite difference. They changed the look of this sword later. So the basic 2HK, this is a bit more straight-edged in the Western release, and a bit more curvy in this release. Far as I could tell, all the other sprites look the same. Not sure what that's about, just kind of neat. Let's see. Oh yeah, paralyzed. So when a unit is stunned, they actually have a misspelled paralyzed with an I instead of a Y that they use. All of the, well, actually most of the icons are a little bit different. Parry is the same. Block is replaced with guard in a different font, and paralyzed is just, again, it's just kind of like a funny looking. Here, let's just go ahead and show it because I've got it available on Mr. Dudeman over here. Because, yeah, when somebody fails to act, it'll say paralyzed with an I. It's not a huge deal, but it is what it is. Also, dang it, there is one thing on this list I forgot to double check. Drain Heart is allowed to be used on undead. Now, I couldn't remember, I don't recall trying that on units in... what's it? I'm apparently brain farting here. I don't recall using that on PSP. Yeah, I don't think that is a thing. I don't know for sure, though. So either way, that is not something that you can do. Oh, also, another random thing, just because I forgot to mention it in other previous videos here. Just kind of a neat note in general whenever fighting dragons. If you ever wondered why dragons drop crafting materials, like they drop stones when you kill them, like they drop inferior ore and stuff, I constantly forget to mention that that's seemingly a bit of a kind of natural, I guess just kind of nature note of sorts. Because, yeah, when it comes to alligators and such, they'll actually eat rocks for the purpose of helping them digest things, which is just kind of neat. So apparently, dragons are like the alligators of this universe. Okay. Let's see, what else is on here? Oh yeah, the storyline mid-interrupt, so that's when you kind of mash start to interrupt a kind of thingamajig. Interestingly enough, it does have some cases where it allows you to interrupt it a little bit sooner in this version. It's inconsistent, but it is interesting that it actually seems to bypass that whole thing where text boxes have to pop up. So you kind of get this weird thing where you're like in the pause menu, but the text box can pop up. And in general, I noticed that there was actually a lot more clipping issues in this version. Like let's say, especially in this map right here, whenever there's Gryphons or Hawkmen like flying past the trees and cliffs here, you might have seen one already, but they have a pretty decent chance to actually clip through the menu, clip through the terrain there. There's that different guard, by the way. But it's something that we also saw in the DLC areas when it came to the Western release. But yeah, in this particular one, looks like that's not quite the case. They apparently smoothed out a lot of that by the re-release. Also, by the way, I'm trying to get that paralysis to trigger here. That's why I'm repeatedly trying to swing at stuff here. You just keep swinging that hand axe. And yes, I was curious to see how long that basic upgraded hand axe would last. Quite a bit, it turned out. So there's that. Okay. Oh yeah, color differences. So there's actually a lot of color differences between the different versions. Just like little shading differences, though, like nothing particularly worth going out of your way to mention. So like if we go to, let's say, over here, we should be able to see the Western release over here, and oh, okay. Well, it won't show the PSP menu. Also, apparently my battery's really low. But what ends up happening is that the Japanese version has a slightly darker tint to a lot of its menus. So I guess it's just trying to be a bit more dark. Also, you can actually poison a lot more bosses in this version. Again, not really sure why. Only found out because I had, poisonous longbows. But you can actually poison stuff. Oh, also, actually, one more thing. Oh, whoops. Did not mean to do that. Do you wish to exit? No, I do not wish to exit. The Warren report actually only has partial lines. Let's see if it'll actually show it here or if world mode changed this. But in other releases, when you go to the Warren report, it'll have additional lines sticking out of branching points in the story. Seemingly in this version, until you've gone through those, it doesn't actually show those branches. Let's see. Oh, and also, by the way, instead of coda, it's called curtain call. Anyway, let's go over here. See if we can take a look at it. But yeah, so like it doesn't have like the thing going down as of yet. I don't know exactly when that changed, but either way, it is what it is. Not really a huge difference. It still has like the branches here, but yeah. I would assume they probably adjusted that later. I don't know if anything changed with the titles because I can't really read those. Don't know if anything necessarily changed with the music, even though I can actually read this. um, but let's see. Haven't done Palace of the Dead yet, so I don't know what's different there. Though I will say this probably... so, beast balance is interesting in this one. Because the beasts are actually a lot tougher than they were even in the PSP version. And golems in particular are so extremely resistant against almost all types of attacks that arguably they're the most optimal they've been throughout the series here. If you, let's say, take one golem and put it through all of the different golem classes, it should be one of the toughest things that you could possibly ever get, especially if that original golem you get happens to be one of the Lodician golems with all their stat bonuses. Them suckers just straight up refuse to die. So, like, just like PSP, usually the easiest method is just to poison them and leave them alone. But, like, in this case, like, absolutely everything bounces off of them. And to its credit, due to higher stats and such, while the longbows are still fantastically useful in most situations, I would say they actually feel a decent bit less comparatively overpowered than they did in the PSP version here. Are they still overpowered compared with other weapons? Yeah, it's not even close. Though it is worth noting that I think, due to, again, maybe it's higher stats, maybe it's what, it feels like damage types might be a bit more dramatic of a difference in this version. Seeing as, let's say, the difference between a Slumber Shot and a Dark Weight actually had like something like 40% damage difference in one particular instance. Again, not an all-the-time thing, but I feel like there's probably a bit more going on there. Okay, let's see. I think that's just about everything. Let's see, let's go down the list. So I had Ninja Longbows, then Ninja to Eagle Eye transition to Ranger transition, items on the list being grayed out, lower crafting rates, crafting weapons lasting longer, buffs on like elements, which was a bit of a theory, because they do seem to prefer buffing elements of the units of the same element. Parry odds possibly being higher, not sure how to test that. Story scaling. I think in multiple cases it seems to be a bit more, I guess, precise about scaling up to you if you try to over-level it. But I don't know to what extent that actually goes, because maybe I was just feeling lazy this week, but good God, the actual scaling as far as experience and stuff went, it felt extremely slow, this particular playthrough. Again, maybe it's just because I was rushing into it, that was the headspace I was in, but oof, it was taking a bit of a hot minute. So, either way, we'll probably report that on part 2. Yeah, spells not deflecting, TK's not tissue. Yeah, the Terror Knights actually have some pretty decent bulk in this one. Again, it's just a matter of their stats being slightly higher, so they're not constantly under thresholds. So they actually do useful things. They don't need Spell Strike in order to make all their debuffs land. But you know, something like this was decently able to last until the endgame. Okay, so I think that more or less covers it. So there are a decent number of differences in this version. Now, is it necessarily worth playing through this version as compared with the other ones? Not really. Like, the additional buffs on from the AI, like, it's one of those things that sounds like it would be way more interesting, but they rarely ever do anything actually interesting with it. It's usually stuff like, oh man, we'd put a fire buff on a unit with a walking stick. Whoop, you know, woohoo. Like, they're gonna do one extra now. Like, watch out. You know, we have True Strike on this unit over here that's using a longbow. Like, that's not for them. So either way, a lot of that stuff is just kind of additional fluff. It's not really a shock that they changed it for the Western release. Let's see. As far as like, let's say how overpowered you'd expect something like a longbow ninja to be, honestly, just use poison scrolls on your regular PSP archers. This was, like, it's overpowered, sure, compared with everything else. It's just less interesting than I was kind of hoping it would be, to be honest. They do shoot farther, so that's fun. And they do, you know, they basically do the archer thing. They just run faster. But it's like basically rogues with heavy crossbows more or less do the exact same thing. So yeah, overpowered, sure, but Actually, in a bit of an interesting twist, due to ranged weapons kind of having the same sharp drop off if they're countered by armor, as they do technically in all versions, it's just less visible in the Western release. This does mean that once you again get to the final boss, there is a pretty decent chance that they may just completely bounce off, which is the point that you want units that have proper high attack weapons and stuff like that, people that specialized in solid melee weapons and such. Which, interestingly, was actually in many ways the role of the spear on the team throughout a good bit of this playthrough. That whenever other stuff couldn't punch through, usually the spear unit could. Even in that case, they still were dealing ones, and I basically just burned through my entire stack of shot grenades, as well as poisoned Dorgi, which is a thing you can do to him in this one. Which leads me to another thing that I can't test because I can't read Japanese. Let me go ahead and pull up a thing real quick. We're going to go ahead and go to the kind of final save state that I had for the final boss. Because I want somebody to tell me, does his skill list have death proof? Or does death proof not exist in this version? Because I feel like there's a lot more bosses that could be poisoned, and I'm fairly certain he's always had death proof. So again, like, that should be preventing poison. So if anybody can tell me on this list, do you see anything that says death proof on it? Because he don't seem to have it, whatever's going on there. Because he can be poisoned, and it was poison and shot grenades that ultimately killed him because I didn't have a single unit that could actually scratch him. So there was that. Okay, anyways, so that is about that for the differences in this one. Yeah, very oddly specific list. I thought it was kind of interesting. And yeah, I was told specifically that there were no coda chapters in this version, and yet there's a coda chapter in the menu. So I'm going to continue on with this one, get a hold of the characters needed to make the coda happen, and then find out whether it's just like episodes 2, 3, and 4. That were maybe the missing parts, or if there's more to that story, or maybe it was some even more pre-release thing, and I gotta get a hold of that and, do like the 700th playthrough with whatever that version is. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, if anyone can read Japanese, please do let me know, and yeah, I will see you guys later. Take care.